The strangest part wasn't losing consciousness at the airport. It wasn't the lawyer's voice or the way the police officer placed a gentle hand on my arm like he had delivered news like this before and knew exactly what came next. It wasn't even the letters, though I will get to the letters, and I promise you, nothing will prepare you for them. The strangest part was the vacation photo. The one I took the morning before the message came. My daughter, Lily, 7 years old, standing at the edge of the ocean in a yellow swimsuit, arms stretched wide like she was trying to hold the whole sky. I was happy when I took that photo. Genuinely, completely happy. The kind of happy that sneaks up on you when you've spent so long being quietly careful that you forget joy doesn't require permission. I still have that photo. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember who I was in the last hour before my life split in two. My name is Elena Marsh. I was 34 years old when I learned that the family I had devoted my entire adult life to had spent the better part of a decade erasing me. I'm a school librarian, I drive a sensible car, I keep a leather notebook where I write my daily to-do lists in the same blue pen every morning because some people need rituals to feel like the ground is solid beneath them. I grew up in a house where nothing was ever quite explained, and I compensated by becoming someone who organized everything she could. I was not the kind of person things like this happened to. I know that's what everyone says, but I mean it differently. I wasn't naive, I wasn't blind. I had seen the quiet favoritism in my family for years. The way my younger sister, Sienna, moved through our household like she was orbiting a different sun, warmer, closer, more golden than the one I seemed to be assigned to. I had felt the low hum of not quite belonging for so long that I had mistaken it for my own personality. What I had not understood, what I could not have conceived of even in my most cynical private moments, was that the exclusion wasn't incidental. It was intentional, architected, sustained over decades by the one person in my life I had never once thought to question: my mother. I want to be precise about something before we go any further. This is not a story about a dramatic falling out. There was no single screaming match, no thrown dishes, no cinematic confrontation in a kitchen where everything finally came to the surface. Those stories exist, and they are painful, and they are real. But mine is quieter than that. And in my experience, the quiet ones cut deeper. Because at least when someone screams at you, you know what you're dealing with. What my mother did was softer, slower, more patient than anything I ever credited her with. She simply waited, managed, redirected, and by the time I was standing under fluorescent airport lights with a lawyer I had never met, holding a manila folder that contained my actual life, 30 years of careful, deliberate erasure had already done its work. I just didn't know it yet. Before we dive into how I set myself free, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you're truly finding this story worth staying for. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I love knowing who's in this room with me. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I need you to understand who my grandmother was before I can explain what losing her truly cost me. Evelyn Cross was my father's mother. She was 71 when I was born and already something of a quiet legend in the family. A woman who had built a small but serious real estate business in the 1970s at a time when women doing such things were viewed as mildly eccentric at best and dangerously ambitious at worst. She had silver hair she wore in a low bun, reading glasses she was always losing, and a habit of pressing folded $20 bills into your palm when she hugged you goodbye, as if money were a form of punctuation, a way of saying, "You matter, and I want you to remember it." She smelled like lavender and cedar. I can still place that smell precisely, the way you can always place the smells from childhood. They live in a different part of the brain, closer to something primal, something that doesn't forget. I was her first grandchild, and I didn't understand what that meant to her until it was far too late. When I was small, before Sienna was born, it was just the two of us on Sunday afternoons. My parents would drop me at her house, a tall, narrow Victorian in the older part of the city, with a garden she tended with the same seriousness she applied to everything. And she would have a project waiting, always a project. One Sunday, we replanted her entire herb garden. Another Sunday, she taught me to balance a checkbook. She believed in giving children real information, real skills, as if she understood that the world was not going to be gentle just because you were young. Elena, she told me once, when I was about 6 and had skinned my knee badly enough to be crying in her kitchen, pain means you're still in the game. The only people who never get hurt are the ones who never move. I thought about that line for 30 years. I still do. The thing about Evelyn was that she was not effusive. She didn't flood you with warmth the way some grandmothers do, all softness and indulgence and unconditional approval of everything you touched. She was precise with her affection. She gave it deliberately, and you knew when you had earned it, and that made it mean something. She came to every school play, she remembered every teacher's name, every friend I mentioned, every book I told her I was reading. She sent cards, real cards, handwritten, for birthdays, for report cards, for what she called just because reasons that I only understood later were a form of paying attention. She paid attention to me in a way I realize now I was hungry for at home. My mother, Diane, was not a cruel woman. I want to be careful about that because cruelty is simple, and simple is not what this story is. Diane was a woman who loved being needed, who organized her emotional life around being the indispensable center of everything she touched. She was warm to people who orbited her the way she wanted them to, and she was subtly, persistently, almost imperceptibly cold to anyone who had their own son. Evelyn had her own son. I think that's where it started, long before I was aware of any of it. A quiet, low-grade competition between two women, one who loved me as her own creation, and one who loved me because she saw something in me worth cultivating. My mother saw loyalty, my grandmother saw potential. And those two things, I have come to understand, are not always compatible. When I was 14, Evelyn sat with me at her kitchen table and told me very plainly that she had set up a trust for me. She didn't explain it in full detail. I was 14 and she was practical, not patronizing. But she told me there would be something for me when she was gone, that she had worked hard and she wanted that work to mean something for the people she loved. "You're going to need room to become who you are," she told me. "I want to make sure you have it." I remember nodding as if I understood the weight of that and not understanding it at all. I went home that night and told my mother what Grandma Evelyn had said. I remember it clearly. I was excited, in the way teenagers are excited by things they don't fully grasp. My mother listened with a small, careful smile, patted my arm and said, "That's very sweet of her, darling. Don't get your hopes up about things like that." I didn't think about that response for years. I should have. Evelyn died when I was 23. I found out from my father in a phone call that lasted less than 4 minutes. He was matter-of-fact in the way he always was about hard things. Brief, informational, emotionally sealed. She had passed in her sleep, he said. It had been peaceful. The service would be on Thursday. I cried for 3 days. My mother came and sat with me the first evening, and she was kind that night, genuinely kind, the way she could be when kindness cost her nothing, and she brought food and held my hand and said that Evelyn had lived a full and meaningful life. All the things people say. But then something shifted. It was small at first, so small I couldn't have named it if you'd asked me. It was the way my mother answered when I asked about the estate. "These things take time," she said. And then, a few months later, "The lawyers are sorting it out." And then when I asked more directly, a gentle but slightly firmer, "Elena, it's not really our place to push. That seems a little grasping." A little grasping. I backed off because I was 23 and I still believed that asking for what you'd been told you were entitled to was somehow improper. I had been raised to believe that the right way to receive things was to wait quietly and trust that the people around you were handling things correctly. I waited for 2 years. During those 2 years, I watched my sister Sienna buy a car I couldn't have afforded. I watched my mother renovate the kitchen in a way that seemed beyond the family's usual budget. I didn't connect dots. That would have required me to believe something I was not yet willing to believe. My father, Richard, was an absence with a face. He was present in the house throughout my childhood, but somehow never quite there. A man who had long ago decided that the path of least resistance was the only path worth taking. He deferred to my mother on everything that mattered. He had opinions about football and weather and very little else. The one time I asked him directly, when I was 26 and Sienna had just put a down payment on an apartment that none of us could logically account for, he looked at me with something that I now recognize as guilt, but that I read at the time as irritation. "Your grandmother's estate was complicated," he said. "There were debts. These things don't always work out the way people intend." "I told you there was a trust," I said. "Elena." He said my name the way my mother said it when she wanted a conversation to end. "Don't do this." I didn't do it. I finished my library science degree. I got my job. I found a small apartment that was mine and mine alone, and I filled it with plants and books and the particular peace that comes from a space no one can take from you. I had a daughter at 30, a long story and a good one, and Lily is the brightest thing in every room she enters. I built a life. I went to family dinners, I showed up at Christmas. I brought the right food, gave the right gifts, said the right things. I performed membership in a family that had already quietly excused me from the table without telling me I'd been voted out. And Sienna, beautiful, easy, accommodating Sienna, she thrived. She traveled, she launched a small business that somehow always had capital. She had the kind of confidence that comes from never having had the ground pulled out from under you, and I watched her with a mix of love and something I was ashamed of, something that felt like hunger. I told myself it was jealousy, simple, petty jealousy. It wasn't jealousy. It was my gut trying to tell me something my mind refused to process. The year before the vacation, my mother said something that I have replayed more times than I can count. We were in her kitchen, the renovated kitchen, the one with the new quartz countertops, and I had made an offhand comment about wishing I could take Lily on a real trip, somewhere international, but that it wasn't really in the budget. My mother looked at me with what I can only describe as studied sympathy, the kind that comes from a script. "Life doesn't always give us what we hoped for," she said. "You have to work with what you have." I nodded. I agreed. I drove home telling myself she was right. She knew in that moment exactly what I had been denied, and she said that to me anyway. My father called in March and invited me on a vacation, not as a family, just him, me, and Lily. He suggested the Gulf Coast, a rental house, a week by the water. He said he wanted to spend time with his granddaughter. He said it with a warmth that surprised me, because warmth was not typically in his register, and I should have noted the surprise as information. Instead, I was just grateful. We arrived on a Sunday. The house was small and yellow and sat 3 rows back from the beach, and Lily immediately kicked her shoes off at the door and ran toward everything. My father was quiet in the way he always was, but he was present in a way he rarely had been, watching Lily dig in the sand with the expression of a man who was trying to memorize something. I took the photo on Thursday morning, the yellow swimsuit, the outstretched arms, the sky. The message arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon, while Lily was napping and I was sitting on the back steps with a glass of iced tea, watching nothing in particular, a number I didn't recognize. The text was short. "Fly home, don't say anything to your mother or your sister. A lawyer will meet you at the gate. His name is Thomas Hale. Please trust this." I read it 4 times. I looked up and found my father standing in the doorway behind me, watching me read it. He knew. He had known it was coming. I understood that immediately and with complete clarity. He had the expression of a man who has been carrying something for so long that the moment it begins to leave him is almost indistinguishable from relief. "Dad," I said. "You should go," he said. "I'll stay with Lily. She can come home with your aunt on Friday." "What is this?" He looked at the garden, at the fence, at anything that wasn't me. "Go home, Elena." I was on a plane by 6 o'clock. The flight was 2 hours, and they were the longest 2 hours I have experienced in my life. I knew something enormous was waiting, and the not knowing had a texture. It sat in my chest like pressure, like the moment before weather changes when the air thickens and the birds go quiet. I tried to read. I tried to sleep. I stared at the window and watched the dark spread across the horizon, and I thought about all the ways a person can know something is wrong and still be astonished when it finally arrives. Thomas Hale was exactly as his name suggested, mid-50s, navy suit, the manner of a man who had spent decades delivering difficult news and had learned to do it with care. There was a police officer beside him, a woman named Officer Reyes, and she had the same quality, not grim, not cold, but careful, measured, as if they both understood that the next few minutes would have a before and an after. We sat in a small conference room off the main terminal. It smelled like recycled air and bad coffee. Thomas Hale opened a manila folder. He told me that my grandmother, Evelyn Cross, had died 11 years earlier, I knew that, and had left a substantial estate, including property, investments, and a trust fund designated specifically and exclusively for me, her eldest grandchild. He told me that Evelyn had worked with an estate attorney, a man named Gerald Purvis, who had been a family associate for decades. He told me that Gerald Purvis had received 22 phone calls from my mother in the 3 weeks following Evelyn's death. He told me that in the weeks after those calls, documents appeared in the estate file bearing my signature, a disclaimer form surrendering my claim to the trust. A form I had never seen, a form I had never signed. He slid a photocopy across the table. The signature was close, very close, but it wasn't mine. Any forensic document examiner would confirm it. Any forensic document examiner did confirm it, he said, past tense, because this had already been examined. The wheels of this had been turning without my knowledge for 3 months, set in motion by a whistleblower at Purvis's firm, who had retired and, in the particular way that retirement sometimes loosens old guilt, decided she could no longer stay quiet. He told me the estimated value of what I had been denied. I won't give you the number, because numbers in stories like this have a tendency to become the story, and this is not a story about money. It never was. But I will tell you that it was substantial enough that my sister had been living off its disbursements for 8 years. Substantial enough that my mother had renovated a kitchen and paid for 2 international vacations, and quietly, steadily built a life on something that was not hers. Substantial enough that my grandmother had intended it to give me room to become who I was. He told me there were letters, 12 of them, spanning 11 years, all of them addressed to me, all of them intercepted. That was when I lost consciousness. Not dramatically, I didn't fall, I simply went somewhere else for a moment, some quiet interior place that the body retreats to when the mind needs a second to catch up. Officer Reyes had a hand on my arm before I fully understood what was happening. Someone brought water, someone said my name. I came back slowly, the way you surface from a deep pool. Thomas Hale waited. He was patient. He had done this before, and he let me take whatever time I needed. I looked at the folder, at the photocopy of the signature that wasn't mine, at my own name at the top of a form that had stolen 11 years of what I was owed, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not rage, clarity. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt the particular pain of being quietly removed from something by someone who was supposed to protect you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It really genuinely lets me know that sharing these hard stories is worth every second. Now let's keep going. The drive home from the airport was 20 minutes. I made it in silence, with the radio off and both hands on the wheel, with the particular focus of someone who has decided not to feel anything until they are somewhere safe enough to feel it. I had Thomas Hale's card in my coat pocket and a folder of preliminary documents on the passenger seat, and I drove the way I write my to-do lists, one thing at a time, one line at a time, because the alternative was to think about the whole list at once, and that was not survivable. I got home, I locked the door, I sat on my kitchen floor, and then I stayed there for a long time. I want to be truthful about what the aftermath looked like, because stories like this have a tendency to skip over the ugly middle part in their rush to get to the justice. The middle part matters. The middle part is where most of the real work happens, and it is not cinematic, and it does not have good lighting. I called in sick to work for 3 days. I told no one why. I ate badly and slept in uneven fragments, and I read Evelyn's letters. Thomas had given me copies, the originals being held as evidence, over and over until I had them nearly memorized. They were devastating in the best and worst ways simultaneously. The early ones were warm and curious. She wrote about her garden. She wrote about a book she had read that she thought I would love. She asked about school, about friends, about whether I was happy. She wrote about the trust in plain, practical terms. She mentioned her attorney's name. She mentioned the approximate schedule of disbursements. She told me to call her if I had any questions, and included her number, her address, a level of logistical detail that made it clear she assumed I would receive this information and act on it. The later ones shifted. The warmth was still there, but under it was something quieter, more careful. She mentioned that she hadn't heard back from me, that she hoped everything was all right, that she wanted me to know the offer stood, that nothing had changed, that she assumed I had my reasons for the silence. I assumed you had your reasons for the silence. That line nearly ended me. The idea that she had spent years believing my silence was a choice, that she had died gently in her sleep in that tall, narrow Victorian house, believing her granddaughter had simply decided not to write back. My mother had stolen that from both of us. I called my father on day 4. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. "How long did you know?" I asked. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm the answer before he gave it. "I suspected for a long time," he said. "I knew for certain about 3 years ago. And you didn't tell me." I didn't know how. I held the phone for a moment. I thought about all the ways I could respond to that. I thought about the vacation invitation, the yellow house, the beach, Lily in her swimsuit, my father standing in the doorway watching me read the message he had arranged for me to receive. I thought about what it costs a man to spend 3 years carrying something he is too afraid to say directly, and so instead he arranges a lawyer and a police officer to say it for him at an airport. "Thank you for the vacation," I said, and I meant it, with all its complications. I contacted Thomas Hale on day 5. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest about that. It was thorough, and it was ultimately decisive, but it was not fast, and anyone who has been through legal proceedings of this kind will tell you that the slowness is its own particular punishment. There were depositions and forensic analyses, and very many formal letters on very official stationery, and there were months. Many months, during which I knew the truth and had to go about my life in the provisional, suspended state of someone who is waiting for the world to officially catch up to what she already knows. My mother called during this period, several times. I did not answer. Sienna called once. Her voicemail said, in a voice that was careful and controlled in a way that told me she had rehearsed it. "Elena, I don't know what you've been told, but I think we should talk before this becomes something it doesn't have to become." I saved that voicemail for 3 months, not because I needed it. The lawyers had better evidence than a voicemail, but because I wanted to have something I could listen to when I doubted myself, when the sleepless nights made me wonder if I was making too much of things, if I was being ungrateful, if I was the problem. The voicemail, with its careful, rehearsed quality and its remarkable absence of the word sorry, was a reliable antidote to self-doubt. There was a morning, about 4 months into the legal process, when I brought Lily to school and came home to find a letter in my mailbox from my mother. Handwritten. 2 pages. I have never read it. I know that sounds strange, but I made a decision standing at my own mailbox on an ordinary Tuesday morning that some things do not require my engagement. She had had 30 years to speak to me plainly, and this was not, I knew with absolute certainty, the letter that would finally manage it. Whatever was in those 2 pages, explanation, justification, appeal, perhaps even something that resembled remorse, it was not something I needed to metabolize. I put it in a drawer. I went inside. I made Lily's school lunch 2 hours early because I needed to do something with my hands. The first small victory came 6 months in, when the forensic document examiner filed his official report. The signature was confirmed as a forgery. Gerald Purvis, the original estate attorney, had already retired and, faced with the weight of the evidence against him, cooperated with the investigation in exchange for leniency. He confirmed the sequence of events in writing, the phone calls from my mother, the pressure, the arrangement, the way it had all been made to look clean. Thomas Hale called to tell me. I was at work when my phone rang, shelving returns in the young adult section, and I stepped into the back hallway and listened. And when he finished speaking, I said thank you and hung up and went back to shelving. A 7th grader asked me if I was okay. I told her I was having a very good day. She looked skeptical, the way 7th graders do. I was having a very good day. Healing, I have come to understand, is not a destination you arrive at. It is a practice, like the to-do list, like the daily ritual of the blue pen and a leather notebook. It is something you choose, repeatedly, under varying conditions, with varying degrees of success, until one day you realize the choosing has become less effortful, and the practice has become something closer to nature. I started therapy 4 months in. I say started as if it was a single decision, but the truth is I called and made an appointment, canceled it, rescheduled it, sat in my car outside the building for 8 minutes the first day before going in, and then sat across from a woman named Dr. Pamela Assay and said, "I don't know where to start." And she said, "Then start anywhere." And I said, "My grandmother's name was Evelyn." And that turned out to be exactly the right place. Dr. Osei had a particular skill I came to depend on, which was the ability to ask questions that revealed the shape of something I hadn't known I was carrying. In our 3rd session, she asked me when I had first learned to make myself smaller in my family's presence, and I opened my mouth to say I didn't know, and instead I said, "When Sienna was born, I was 5. And then I stopped talking because I had just understood something that had been sitting in my body for 29 years. I don't want to compress the therapy into a paragraph and make it sound tidy. It wasn't tidy. There were sessions I left feeling rinsed out, emptied of something I hadn't had words for before. There were sessions I left feeling worse, which Dr. Osei had warned me about, that the process of excavation is sometimes more painful than the state of not knowing. There were nights after those sessions when I sat with Lily reading her bedtime book and felt something almost unbearable, because the story we were reading was about a child whose family loved her without condition, and the distance between that story and my own history felt, in those moments, enormous. But Lily would look up at me from her pillow with those dark eyes, the ones she got from her father's side, the ones that have nothing to do with my family's history, and the distance would contract, Because she was not in that history, she was entirely her own story, and I was the author of the home she grew up in, and I could make it whatever I decided. That was the realization that shifted something essential. I could not rewrite my childhood. I could not give myself back the Sunday afternoons at Evelyn's table, or the letters I never received, or the specific version of myself that might have existed if she had been allowed to be in my life the way she intended. Those things were gone, and grief for them was legitimate, and I spent real time in that grief, which is different from drowning in it. But I was 34 years old, and I had a daughter, and I had a grandmother who had spent 11 years writing letters to tell me she had made sure I would have room to become who I was. I decided to become who I was. The legal process concluded 14 months after I walked off that plane. The settlement, I'll call it that for simplicity, reflected the value of what I'd been denied across the years, with interest calculated by people with professional degrees and very detailed spreadsheets. My mother and sister did not go to prison, which I know may frustrate some people to hear. The forgery charge against Gerald Purvis was resolved through the cooperation agreement. Civil accountability was the primary instrument of justice in this story, and I have made my peace with that, because it was not nothing. It was in fact considerable. Sienna reached out one final time through her own lawyer to ask if there was any scenario in which I would consider a private resolution. I asked Thomas Hale to respond on my behalf, and he did, and the answer was the answer we'd already given. My father called me the week after the settlement was finalized. He asked if I hated him. I thought about it seriously, which I think he surprised him. "No," I said, "but I think you need to understand what you participated in by doing nothing. And I think that understanding is something you owe yourself, not me." He was quiet for a while. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you," he finally said. I believe that's true, and I believe it without needing him to confirm it, which is the particular quality of self-knowledge that therapy, time, and a folder of handwritten letters can eventually give you. I planted an herb garden. That probably sounds like a small detail, and in isolation it is, but I planted it the spring after the settlement in a planter box on my apartment balcony, and I chose the same herbs Evelyn had kept in her garden: rosemary, thyme, lavender, flat-leaf parsley. I did it on a Sunday. I had Lily help me, which mostly meant she put dirt in places it wasn't supposed to go. But there is a version of productivity that is really just being present together, and that was the most important kind that morning. I wrote in my leather notebook when we were done: Evelyn's garden, balcony, Lily got dirt on her shoes. Perfect day. Some days the healing looks like legal settlements and forensic reports and carefully worded letters from attorneys. Some days it looks like a 7-year-old with dirt on her shoes, standing in a planter box, smelling a sprig of lavender, like it's the most surprising thing she's ever encountered. Both of those things are real. Both of them count. I stopped performing membership in a family that excluded me without my consent. I stopped attending the dinners and the holidays, and the careful domestic theater of people pretending everything was fine. I did not do this angrily. I did not announce it. I simply stopped showing up, the way you stop going to a party when you finally acknowledge you never actually enjoyed it. I built a different table, a smaller one. My father, occasionally, when he is willing to be honest, my aunt, Evelyn's daughter-in-law, who had suspected for years, and wept when I called to tell her it was confirmed, 2 or 3 friends who had sat with me through the worst of the middle months, Dr. Rosset, who had given me back the language for my own interior life, and Lily, always Lily. I told you at the beginning that the strangest part wasn't losing consciousness at the airport. I've thought about that a lot, about why the photo of Lily at the water's edge feels more central to this story than the moment the ground gave out under me in a sterile conference room. And I think it's because that photo represents the last version of myself that hadn't yet been asked to hold this knowledge, the last clean moment before the before and the after. But here's what I've come to understand in the slow, unglamorous, necessary work of these 3 years since. The photo is still true. The happiness in it was real. My mother's choices could intercept letters and forge signatures and redirect the material inheritance of my grandmother's life, but they could not touch what Evelyn had actually given me, which was not, in the end, a trust fund. It was a model. A woman who paid attention, who worked hard, who left things better than she found them, who wrote letters for 11 years to a granddaughter she believed, even in silence, was worth reaching. I carry that in a way no document can transfer and no forgery can touch. I used to believe that belonging to a family meant accepting whatever shape that family decided to take. I understand now that belonging to yourself is the prior condition, the thing that has to be established first, before anything else can be built on top of it. You cannot be erased if you know who you are. You cannot be fully denied what is yours if you are willing to stand up in a sterile room at an airport, accept a glass of water from a stranger, and say, "I am still here. Tell me the rest." The letters are framed now. Not all 12, I'm not theatrical about these things. Just one. The last one. The one where Evelyn says she hopes my silence is happiness. I framed it because I want to see it every day. Not as a wound, not anymore, but as evidence. Evidence that I was loved, quietly and consistently, by someone who saw me clearly. Evidence that the love existed even when I couldn't feel it. Evidence that some things, if they're strong enough, survive even a decade of intentional burial. I think about the women who find themselves in rooms like mine, at airport terminals and attorneys' offices and kitchen floors, the ones who are still waiting to find out what they're owed, financially, emotionally, historically. I want to say to them what I wish someone had said to me a decade ago. The quiet in your life is not evidence of peace. Sometimes it is evidence of management. And the moment you start asking questions that other people work hard to redirect, that is not you being a little grasping. That is you being awake. Stay awake. Lily turned 8 last month. I took her back to the Gulf Coast. A different house, a different beach, same ocean. She wore the same yellow swimsuit, which is a small miracle because children grow without mercy, and somehow this one held on. I took the same photo, arms stretched, sky held. She is still trying to hold the whole sky, this daughter of mine. I have decided that's an excellent habit. I have decided to try it myself. This has been another story from Revenge Room, where we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. If this story reached you in some way, please subscribe and stay with us. Every story we share is for someone who needed to hear it. Don't forget to leave a comment below. Have you ever been quietly removed from something by someone you trusted? How did you find your way back to yourself? We read every single one. Until next time, take care of your story because no one else is going to protect it the way you will.